So, but it's, the fact that we have you here, we sort of like to think we sort of recognize there is these cross-cultural issues. Any horror stories of people or companies that actually haven't chosen either to haven't recognized this or have chosen not to deal with it? Now, good, juicy ones. Names will be appreciated.
Well, I don't have any horror stories because a lot of the companies that I'm working with recognize that this is an issue, but so I can't, I'm sorry. But I have seen a lot of, a lot of missed deadlines. I'll give you one example. One manager I worked with, she's from India, and her English is totally fluent, and she's been here for years, and she's very smart. But she was speaking so quickly at her team, and her team was mostly Chinese people. And because she's the boss, they don't want to say, oh, I can't understand you. And they think it might reflect poorly on their English, so they don't say anything. And then she asked at the end, do you guys have questions? No questions. So then a week later, they come back to the meeting and they've not done what she expected. And so now they're behind and she doesn't get it. She says, well, I asked, do you guys have questions? And so we worked on, it's just back to that same thing, being more aware, slowing down. Instead of saying, do you guys have questions, saying like, what are your questions? And being a little bit more open-ended in that way. So horror stories. Losing that Sony account was a pretty big deal with the Japanese team. That's all I can think of now.
So, what kind of programs, initiatives you've seen help employees whose English is a second language, ESL as we call it in the game. That's what it says here anyway. How have you helped them, or any ideas to help them not only communicate well in meetings, but just fit in, in the water cooler situation, or come down here? Like, any ideas how we can help them feel engaged?
Yeah, I think one of the common things you hear a lot from ESL learners is that they want to practice, but they'll work, and so they know work lingo pretty well, and then they go home and then they're with their native speaking, their spouse from their same country or their friends, and they never engage, and they feel like Americans are too busy. They always say, well, Americans are really friendly up front, and then they're too busy. And so I think making an effort to, have social events at work, making sure that they know that they're invited, that's really, really, really helpful. In terms of work communication, I think a proactive approach is really important. So sometimes companies won't address it until it's already an issue. And then it becomes, hey, your language skills aren't very good, go get help. And then it's shameful and they're embarrassed. So I think a lot of what you see now is that people realizing that it's inevitable that these challenges are going to come up, and here are a bunch of programs that proactively are available to you and that you can get help with. One example is Twitter, who's one of my clients. They used to send non-native English speakers to a school in San Francisco, an English school, but my impression was that it was a little too remedial. So they're going in there and they're conjugating verbs and they're busy, and they're wanting higher level stuff. So we go in there and we teach effective meeting skills or pronunciation boot camp and come to them so they're getting these skills that they need anyway, and then also getting feedback on language. Another thing that they probably want is feedback. I always hear, nobody tells me when I make a mistake, so I have no idea. So on your team, making it more of a thing where you give each other feedback, and if they ask you, like, hey, let me know how my English is, or if I make a mistake, let me know. Let them know, because they genuinely want that in a nice way, of course. You got to sandwich it, but definitely let them know if they ask for that.
The question here is, how do you think teams can benefit from having international members? But I'd actually like to expand it a little bit. Culturally, how can AdRoll benefit from having international teams? Like, we've got people here from Sydney and Tokyo, and also maybe it's a bit of a stretch. How can we help them? Can we help them grow and be better in this multinational world? So, multinational world, that's probably crap, but anyway. But you know what I meant.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think I like that, because I think another new approach is it's not just up to them to adapt to us, but what can we do to help them adapt, and how can we adapt to them? So I think being really conscious of, again, how you're communicating, how quickly you're communicating. Actually, my friend Michael and I are working on a training right now that is geared towards the local teams or the headquarters, native speakers. How can you more effectively engage your remote teams? How can you be more clear? So there's a lot to be done on that front. What was the second part of the question?
Yeah, it was more like, not only what can we gain, like what can AdRoll, San Francisco gain from having international divisions, but also, is there any way we can sort of help those international offices? What can they learn from us?
So no, I'm prepared. I think, again, being open to working on your communication too, and really being honest with yourself of how clear am I, how slow am I speaking, and asking them for feedback as well. Like, am I clear? Because let me tell you, if you're a clear speaker, they love you. They're like, oh my gosh, you're the one person I can really understand, and they will really, really love you. So you want to make sure that you're that person. So getting feedback from them, and they'll really, really appreciate that. And in terms of what AdRoll can gain from having international employees, I mean, I think there's no choice, but you have to, if you want to sell your product in other countries and have skilled workers. I mean, I just think there's no way around it. And it's, another thing is to, if it's possible, budget-wise, to go there and check out the remote office. So you meet them face to face. That's going to make everything flow better. And then if there's an opportunity for them to come here so they don't feel like, San Francisco office gets to do all the cool stuff and we're just remote, but making sure that they feel integrated into the culture is huge.
Yeah, I can assure you there's a line of people queuing up to go to Sydney and Tokyo, so get behind me. I haven't been to the offices yet, but I've been to both cities. So, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to somebody, if we, again, the question was like somebody, working in a foreign country, adapting to their environment. But a lot of that was like assuming that they're coming here. But like, let's turn that on its head. What would be the advice if we were going to be ambassadors in Sydney, or we're going to be ambassadors in Dublin, or ambassadors in Japan? What was that piece of advice you give to that person as they're getting on the airplane?
Well, if you were going to be going to a non-native, to a country where they're not speaking English, I would say to be really honest with yourself in terms of where you're at and act accordingly. So, am I clear? Are people understanding my pronunciation? And if they're not, there are tons of resources to go get help. To give you an example, I have a friend named Wouter who's from Belgium, and he came here about 6 years ago. His English was pretty good, but he really wanted to be a top sales guy, and he knew he had to have great English. So he worked on his accent. He joined Toastmasters, worked on his public speaking skills, and he's a fantastic he speaks like a native speaker, but he really, right up front, he's like, what do I need help with? He asked for feedback all the time, and he went and he fixed it. So it's definitely possible, but really asking for feedback and then getting on it. And in terms of adapting to a culture, is anybody thinking about going to the remote office? Yeah, cool.
Get behind me.
Just get in there, get to learn about the culture, find out if somebody uses an expression, what does it mean, and just really making yourself available to go to social functions and things like that. Yeah.
So I think that's the set of predefined questions. Do we want to open this to the floor and to the international offices, or what do we do? Okay.
There we go. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about kind of speaking too fast, and you've seen some deals were lost that way. Do you have examples in the past where, say, non-native speakers and is maybe kind of dumbing it down too much, and they're not really conveying the best message or selling or whatever it may be, the context of the meeting, but they kind of take too heavily that they're non-native speakers, and they kind of speak in, like, I guess, too dumbed down of a, and dumb is probably not the best word to describe it, but they kind of hold back too much. Have you seen that before, and what practices do you recommend for kind of working your way around that?
Okay, so I think your question is, can you take it too far? We talked about how it's really important to slow down and use simple language, but can you take it too far and have it be not appropriate for the audience because it's too simple? Is that what you're saying?
More so, like, have you seen that? And then, kind of like, what are your best practice recommendations for really gauging your audience? And because if you're not a first language, or it's not your first language, there's different levels. I mean, obviously, some people are elementary or further than that. I guess, kind of, what are your best practices for getting the best understanding of the room you're speaking to?
That's a good question. In terms of making it too simple, I would say no, I haven't seen that. I think actually one advantage that non-native speakers have that they may not know is that they do use simple vocabulary. So even if you're speaking to all native speakers, if you're using a bunch of buzzwords and quickly, you're not really going to connect with them either. So I would say probably not. But a good way to gauge the best practice is always rehearse. I mean, it just makes a huge difference. If you have a talk coming up, to practice on people and get their feedback and adjust accordingly it's going to be night and day in terms of your results. And then my other thing in terms of speed is it's never as slow as you think it is. Like sometimes I think, oh, I'm an ESL teacher, I speak slowly, and then I've listened to myself. Sometimes I record myself. That's a good thing to do too, is audio record yourself speaking at a meeting or giving a talk so you can hear it for yourself. And I'm like, whoa, I speak quickly. So it's usually never as slow as you think. Yeah?
Hey, Brendan, you awake?
Oh,
Hey, I see you.
yes, I'm awake. Turn it on.
Now I'm going to get back for all the hassle you've caused me in the last month.
What did he say? I couldn't hear that. もう一度お願いします。
So, Brendan, how has your experience been in Japan as an American trying to work out what's going on there and trying to do the best for both AdRoll here and both AdRoll over there?
Great question. Can you hear me okay?
Hang on. Okay. Yeah.
So I would say that my experience has been, I mean, I've tried to take a lot of actually what we've been speaking about in this session to heart. When I first got here, I tried to like really speak slowly and understand that it's everyone in the Tokyo office, their English is a lot better than my Japanese, so I understand that, and I understand how hard it can be to communicate in a language that's truly not your native one. So I've tried to, with everything that I've done, not only learn about the culture, but also when I'm communicating, try to make it as easy as possible. But I think the team has helped me a lot, and I'm hopefully helping the team a lot. I've learned a ton, and I'm excited for the next couple months as well. And that would be my quick and short thoughts on my experience thus far and what I've put in before and during.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to having you coming back and helping us understand the needs from that office. I think we have a lot to learn as well. So, and thanks for all the work you've been doing over there. It's invaluable.
Thank you, Patrick. I look forward to our meeting tomorrow morning.
Does anybody in the office there have a question?
I'll ask.
Luciano.
So hi, I'm Luciano. I have a question for you, Anne. What do you advise to the non-English speakers, especially Japanese? You know, our culture is very indirect. We're very shy, and on top of that, we have a complex not being able to speak English that well. So that makes it even harder for us to speak up during like meetings with an English speaker. What do you advise to us like during those meetings? How can we like participate more in the meeting?
That's a great question. There's a few things. One thing I think preparation before is big. Where am I looking? Are they? The camera's right there. Okay. Preparation before is huge, and I know in a meeting you don't know exactly what's going to come up or what exactly you're going to say, but if you're especially at the level of English where you're still having to think about translating or forming how to form the sentences, that's going to be huge to spend some time before critically thinking and writing down some ideas. So that's one that makes a big difference. The second thing is to get in the meeting early. So don't wait and just let that sit there like, damn, I need to participate and I haven't said anything yet. Make your presence known early and get in there. So it becomes, you get those nerves out. That's a big thing. Another thing is to really practice being louder. So I notice for me, if I speak up and I'm louder, I actually feel more confident. And so I think a lot of times you see non-native English speakers, because they're not feeling that confident, their volume will be lower, and that makes it even harder. So just practice. Find a venue to practice. I do a class called Effective Meetings for Non-Native English Speakers where we talk about all these techniques and practice them and give them feedback. But also another tip is to find somebody, a native or non-native speaker who you think is really good, and mimic them. Start to pay attention to what phrases do they use to interrupt, what phrases do they use to give feedback, what body language do they use, and start to mimic that and make it your own is also something that works well.
Thank you.
One more thing I thought about, how do you gauge what level of English they're at? I think a lot of times people, especially in the Bay Area, if they're local, their English is pretty good. So they're at a level where they may not catch all the words and they still feel that they struggle, but what's hard is that you talking to them, you might think, oh, their English is great, but they still want it to be perfect. So I think their English level is pretty high, but it's still good to simplify as much as possible. And one thing I like to prove that is, do you guys know what the average grade level that a TED Talk person giving a TED Talk speaks at? Whether it's college, high school, grade school? 6th grade, yeah, 6th grade. So simple is good.
I mean, kind of going off of Jeff's question, I know what I run into a lot when I'm talking with clients about technical issues. I want to explain it as much as possible, but then I end up over-explaining to the point of almost recognizing the person I'm talking with, which I don't mean to do. Do you have any pointers for when you're talking with someone, the best way to gauge their knowledge base at all, so that we can say what we need to say and get our point across without insulting somebody's knowledge base and their intelligence?
So does this happen with native and non-native speakers? It doesn't matter?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
But mostly I can gauge it more with native speakers because I kind of understand more the clues that they have or the hints that they're giving me, like, yeah, I got it. Whereas non-native speakers might not be necessarily like, yeah, they'll let me finish.
They'll let you finish and then, yeah, that's hard. I've had that too, for sure. I would say is coming up, starting with your point, having a give an example and then stop and then asking them, was that enough? Do you want me to go into more detail? So having a basic explanation, stopping, and then actually pausing, not like, okay, I'm not sure, so I'm going to keep talking, but really pause and stop and get feedback from them, whether they want you to continue or not, is the best way. Michael, do you have any suggestions for that?
So with that pause, you don't want to just look at them and go, You need to, this is just a trick, you actually take a sip of coffee, You pretend that you are tying your shoe or something like that, that you're engaged, but there's something that just distracts you for a second, or you need to just double check something in your notes, and then you look back up and go, yeah, and any questions? And that gives them the sense of like, oh, they're not just waiting for a question, but it gives them a pause so that they can think of that question to ask you. And then when they ask that question, really listen. It might be like the stupidest question you've ever heard, and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be so much work because I thought we were this far ahead, but we're actually this far behind. That's where you have to take the big deep breath in and just go, okay, let's step back a few. And if you show that patience up front and you show that you're willing to engage that person right from the get-go, or even if this is a person that you've had bad experiences in the past and you've just decided this is now the turning point, you want to make this turn so you can get a better work relationship, demonstrate that, and there will be that magic day where they will start to demonstrate that with you, and we'll just go forward with that. But it does take that commitment of wanting to turn that leaf.
Another thing, if there are technical topics that you have to explain frequently, I would say keep a file, a story, either story box or analogy, finding some way, really, really good way that you break that concept down to non-technical people and hone that over the months and make that really good and just reuse it.
Hey, you guys in Sydney have any questions? I can't see Hussein there, so I can't make fun of him.
Oh, today.
You guys can talk to me. I think, like for the Sydney office, I think one of our biggest things is trying to explain cultural differences and the differences between the English language in various places. So I don't know if you have any strategies on dealing with different types of English and trying to explain some of the cultural differences which seem really silly to some of the American team, but they actually wouldn't be understood over here.
So basically summarize how to deal with the cultural differences even within variations of the English language.
Yeah.
And try to understand how you guys like Marmite and Vegemite and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay. Exactly that.
Can you give an example of some of the cultural differences you might run into?
Okay, so this is an example, and I don't know the person that this happened with is there, but our creative team, so the team that does all the OneRoll adverts and pieces, are based in San Francisco. And they gave a creative concept which focused really heavily around donuts as a breakfast food. Now, donuts, we know what donuts are. There are donut places, we have Krispy Kreme, but it's not really a cultural reference that a lot of Australians would have got. Like it's not something that we eat all the time for breakfast. And trying to explain that actually turned into a really, really long conversation about donuts. And people in San Francisco sending me map links of where the Krispy Kremes are in Sydney. But it's just not something that we would normally think of as a breakfast food. And trying to explain that actually turned into a massive conversation.
That's
strategies on trying to deal with that if you've got any.
Yeah, well, I have strategies to deal with cultural differences, but
this is something that it's kind of based on engineering practice, but we have in engineering things called style guides. The idea is this is what we agree in the convention in certain situations. Maybe that's and you build it up over time as you experience it. Maybe that's something you guys could do, is like sort of build a style guide for breakfast. What's acceptable in each of the regions, and that's a documented style guide that you all agree on. So if they know, okay, I'm doing a breakfast thing, it's in Australia, okay, what's the style guide say for this situation? And you sort of build it up. It's something you build up over time. It's an engineering practice we do, especially around front-end design. It's a sort of practices that we all sort of work for. So maybe that's something that could work for you. Style guides. It's something we do in engineering. Matt, don't expose the bullshit I just said.
I can get back to you on think about that question more. I mean, one thing, if it's not, if it's just kind of rapport killing, that people aren't understanding the other cultures in the remote offices, maybe you guys could have like an international food day where you have breakfast from Australia and different places, so there's a little bit more understanding of the culture in the remote offices too, is one idea. Michael, any ideas for that?
Japanese. What do you eat in Japan for breakfast? Usually rice, seaweed, tofu, and some fish once a night. So if everybody's game, I mean, that's what I ate for breakfast when I would go to a small Japanese traditional house for a hotel. And if you guys can eat that and to be able to, appreciate it, that's the hard part. Because usually Americans, when they do that, they want to make a big fuss over it. Oh my God, I can't believe I ate this. Oh my goodness, this is Japanese food. Oh, and all of that type of conversation can be, you can hear all. Just eat it and go on with your day. It would be something that I would recommend. But I know this
Sorry, who is that? Can you come to the front?
I'm a friend of the speaker, but I lived 2 years in Japan near Kyoto.
Okay.
I can add for context to Kat's question. So Kat and I both work on the marketing team. And something that we do struggle with as a team is looping in the international teams really, really early when we're creating new material or we're planning events. And so I think what you're referring to, Kat, is maybe one of like our really tasty breakfast events where we want to bring in advertisers and our clients to like engage with our sales teams. But if something is really centered around, we do a lot of things around donuts and bagels because we know in the US, like people get those references, they get really excited about them. So I guess, yeah, any advice on like, if we, there are things that may be really strong points of reference for Americans that we don't even realize that people in other regions may not get the reference. Like how do we help our international friends or make it easier for them to like, I don't know if that helped your question at all, Kat.
Well, in terms of whoever's organizing or putting something out, I would say just like a presentation, you got to know your audience and it's time consuming, but you've got to spend time up front really understanding who your audience is, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a breakfast or whatever. So even more opportunity to collaborate with remote offices and run the ideas by people like, hey, this is what we're thinking of, this is our idea for the pitch, or this is our idea for the breakfast. Are there any, and just getting feedback, more feedback before. So you're not dealing with it in real time, like, oh, that didn't fit, that didn't work. And I hope that I'm answering that question, but it's a tough one. I did think about one more idea that's a little bit off topic, but before you had asked me what are some ways to engage remote offices more frequently. And one of the things that I think is really important, and these guys here will appreciate that, is to share the pain in the sense that it shouldn't always be, the people in San Francisco who get the 10 a.m. meetings, but to move it around. Do you guys do that already? Okay, cool. Yep.
Our global all hands does move around to include the Dublin office and the Sydney and Tokyo office. I actually had this when I had a lot of remote engineers in previous companies. I'm actually hiring some of them here now, and somebody would call, we'll call a 4:00 meeting, to discuss this topic, and it says, well, half my team have gone home, so forget about it. They've switched their computers off, and I'm not calling them at 7:00 to jump on a call. So get used to it and start thinking about this. If you want to have a meeting with this team, have it early. And to me, that was very important that I and the team appreciated that I respected their time. they had to work, we had to work on their time and not vice versa. So they did really appreciate that.
Hello, this is Shay. I have a quick question, sort of piggybacking on some cultures having a difficult time giving constructive feedback or things that aren't necessarily effective. Do you have additional tips when it's important to get and understand things that aren't working very well and aren't moving in a positive direction, but you can actually engage folks and make them feel more comfortable to share that? Yeah. Sorry. So in cross-culture, how can you make folks who are not comfortable getting constructive feedback, things that aren't positive, and how can you make them more comfortable to deliver that? When oftentimes that's the most important information you need to get, whether it's process improvements or optimization needs and things of that nature.
So how do you make them feel more comfortable receiving the feedback or giving it?
Giving it, especially when there's like leadership involved and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I would think one thing is letting them know that it's coming. So sometimes it's hard for people to give and receive feedback when it's on the fly. So one strategy I've seen, a guy I work with Facebook did this with his team, and he said, hey, we're going to do feedback this week. Everybody come with one thing that we should improve on and one thing to that's going well. So letting them know it's coming and that they're going to be expected to do that. Also, I think giving the rationale of why that's really important in this culture, it's to help people improve, and then modeling good feedback for them. Michael, any other ideas?
Other than what you said makes great sense. The sense of putting out the expectation that you're wanting feedback. I would give even more explicit, in a sense of like one piece of feedback that can help improve the project, one question that you have for me, and really ask them to email it the day before. The more that you scaffold it, does everybody know what the word scaffolding means? Is it a teacher type of word? Scaffolding means that you have a sense of expectation and you slowly put out that information so that you can level the person to a certain understanding where you need them to be, but you don't expect them to get to 0 to 50 within 2 seconds and be right there with you and then ask for feedback. So you slowly dose it out over the week, and then when you get to the week and somebody hasn't given you what you wanted, then you can go into the sense of like, let's talk with you privately afterwards because this is not what I'm asking for. There's some sort of misunderstanding here, either through communication or through culture, but we really need to figure this out before we move on because you've set your expectations so clearly. I call this painting somebody into the corner. You painted them in there, they gotta do something, and if they don't do something, then you recognize that there might be even something more to this that you need to bring to your higher level.
And also, one thing that's worked for me, and this isn't an international thing, but this is just as a leader, I'm very quick to, say when I failed. I'm very quick to say that, and up front, if we're going to try something, if it doesn't work, I'll be the first to say it didn't work, and I'll try and, explain why it didn't work, and get the culture where it's actually, as a leader, you lead by example, that it's okay to give feedback, and be the first one to just dump it on yourself, and that makes people hopefully a bit more free to follow your example.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, letting them know that you're okay with getting feedback. Also having a discussion early on, and this could be more cultural, like if you've got, like our example of a Russian engineer and a Japanese engineer, it's very different. Asking them up front, how do you want me to communicate with you? Having a discussion early on about communication preferences can help a lot as well.